welcome everybody to Black West God. Their little feedback. Let's see what that is. Hi, everybody. My name's Crystal, and I'm here with my co-host, John. Are you with
And
us?
I'm John. Yes, I'm with you, Crystal. I'm John Kimmett Shabazz L with the Shabazz Report.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We're still new at this, but hear a little bit of feedback. John, do you have another device on? You know?
Let me turn off everything here I got going on. Okay, you hear some feedback. Okay, let me. What about now? Have things gotten better?
No, not yet. Let me see here. Yeah, it's definitely on your end.
Let me
So,
let me close the window.
okay, that's a little bit better. Something just happened. All right,
Is it?
okay, everybody.
Is it?
We, I'm Crystal Good. I'm here with my co-host John Kemet Shabazz L with the Shabazz Report, which is a grassroots. You tell them what the Shabazz Report is, John.
Oh, okay. It's probably best that I do. I like to refer to what we do with the Shabazz Report as an Afrocentric grassroots media, where it operates as to help us with our identity, to have an Afrocentric perspective onto today's current events, which we don't necessarily get from the mainstream media. It was a pleasure to be able to hook up with Sister Crystal Good to do the Black by God. Okay, so I'm here on as a co-host, but I'm saying I appreciate being able to do a thing with Sister Crystal Good. So with that said, I'm kind of excited about tonight's interview with Reverend Matthew Watts in reference to the new State of Working West Virginia 2020, the State of Racial Inequality Report. And we had took some time to take a look at it. I appreciate Sister, I call her Sister Crystal Good because she's my colleague in this. We go back, all the way to the early 2000s in this, when you were out at the Empty Glass. I kind of want to set I want to set the precedent that we're both artists, but we use artistry as a form of journalism to be able to give us a platform here in West Virginia, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do a show about that in terms of the way we're perceived here in West Virginia, Crystal. But tonight's show specifically is going to deal with that 2020 report. And there's a statement out of page 2 by Mr. Sean O'Leary that I want to read very quickly.
Hey John, Sean,
to set the tone.
Just wanted to say
I know
that
we just heard from him.
Yeah.
We just heard from him calling in, so he's probably listening. Okay, Sean, I don't know you, so this is our first time coming in contact with one another. But stay on standby, okay? But I want to read it from page 2 in that form. Let me get this out, Krista, real quick, and I'm gonna give it back to you.
Let me just ask you real quick though, because there's a lot of feedback. Okay. If you're on your phone, maybe turn your computer volume down.
Okay. Let me. I'm trying to see what's going on here.
Yeah, that's better. Whatever.
Now, Krista, I'm gonna move away. I'm gonna move away from. Is that better?
That's better. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me move. Probably got something going on over there. Okay. Now, I just wanted to quote from Sean O'Leary on page 2 of the State of Inequality Report. He says specifically that, and while there has been progress, the inequalities that existed in 2010 have existed throughout the nation's history and still persist in 2020. And West Virginia is not immune to them. Even before the pandemic and subsequent economic collapse, which has disproportionately hurt the black community, Black West Virginians were almost twice as likely to be living in poverty. Black households have only 76% of the income of white households. Black men and black women face higher unemployment rates and lower wages. Persistent disparities in education, wages, health, and throughout the criminal justice system. Now, I had to read that segment from him to be able to give him props without knowing him, but I need to be able to say this as an Afrocentric. This is a Caucasian giving us information dealing with black people. And as an Afrocentric, I must point that out, right? Because we must assess that information. However, if it's not getting done, and it has to be done, I want to speak to Reverend Watts in more detail about that later on, Crystal, once we get him on the line. And that would be one of the questions, because we have to assess the information coming in from whoever it's coming in when it's doing an assessment on us. Is it credible information? Is that a legitimate way of looking at it? Okay.
Well, I think
and
so.
This is a preface to Reverend Watts coming in and clearing that up, right? Because it was one of the questions I had for him, because I not only speak for myself, I speak for other people that don't get a chance to speak. Because in the 2010 report, I advised certain segments of the African American community about that report. It was at least one or two people that questioned that, the statistics, based upon the fact that who's doing it, who's gathering the statistics, are we involved in it?
Well, let's ask Sean. Let's ask him. He's right here. So, Sean, I'm going to bring you on and see here. Sean, can you hear us?
I'm here. There we go. I was muted, but I'm unmuted now.
Okay. Well, thanks for calling in. And I guess the question is really, how involved outside of the essays were black folks from West Virginia in this report? And not to, can you just tell us a little bit about how you put the report together?
Yeah, so we put out the report, a State of Work in West Virginia report every year. And we look at a lot of the same questions every year. And the original report is always sort of like in response to this sort of like business-centric view of how the state's economy is doing, where we wanted to ask the question, well, what about, the actual people in West Virginia? What about the workers in West Virginia? What about, the people who are actually doing the work? How are things going for them? But we also, when we have the opportunity, have a theme or take a specific issue and look at it more in depth. So, we've done reports in the past about, the state's labor force participation, about the state's immigrant communities, about the asking the question of what is it about West Virginia that we're always ranked so low on all these different measures? Why is West Virginia so poor? Was the title of one report. So this year, the fact that it had been 10 years since the original Legacy of Inequality report, which we released right when I was an intern at the Center on Budget and Policy, was to take a look at that. So I had reached out to our board president, Jennifer Wells, and some of our advisory board committees, advisory committee members, particularly Dr. Lori Andrus, as well as the authors of the original Legacy of Inequality report, and just said, what do you think about revisiting this? Just refreshing the data, looking back 10 years ago, 10 years since, and thinking about those same questions that we asked back then, and thinking about them 10 years later, and what that process has been like, and sent around a couple of different drafts, sent around some the preliminary data, what we were finding at first, and then because in the past, in the original Legacy of Inequality report, they were all very collaborative, and the State of Work in West Virginia reports are usually very collaborative, and it was just really, really difficult to do that in the age of COVID and Zoom calls, and everyone's and spread throughout the state. So that's where we came up with the idea of, well, let's break it up and instead of having just, one report with, the data section and the introduction and a history and policy recommendations, let's have some personal stories. Let's have some thoughts about, people on the ground, people actually doing this work. What has your experience been? What are your ideas? What are your thoughts, and what is this data saying to you outside of just laying out the numbers and talking about it, and sort of sometimes it can be a just dry, overwhelming, looking at just numbers and charts and the data. Let's have a little bit more to it than that. And so that's how this report came together, and that's how it was similar to our past reports, but really different, that we haven't done it this way before.
Oh, excuse me, Sean. I want to introduce myself to you. My name is John Kemet Shabazz L. I'm with the Shabazz Report, and I have a specific question for you directly. Could you see direct appropriations out of the annual state and county budgets, a certain special status given to African Americans, so-called African Americans, as a direct remedy to these disparities in terms of, for instance, in terms of home ownership? And now this is a preference to Reverend Watts coming in and addressing what he has put forth in the report. But as a community activist myself, I believe in direct action, and I see your report, not only the 2020 report, but if you say that you were involved with the 2010 report as well, I see it as direct evidence that we need direct attention aside from any other policies that would be in place where resources for development would come directly to us. And
right,
I'd like for you to address that at this particular time, aside from any other group, specifically where it would make us an exceptional group aside from any other group because of these racial and economic disparities that have been specifically identified and served notice upon thereupon the record. So I'd like for you to speak to that if you would.
Sure. I just want to clarify. I was not involved with the first report. Just for the record, I just wanted to clear that up. But I think one thing that we talked what was talked about in that first report was the need, and Crystal and I have talked about this before, to improve just some of the data. So right now, where would we even start? There is no one single agency in the state that really collects any significant data on the state's Black communities and the Black population. And we just saw this, with some of these COVID numbers that are coming out, that we have this big chunk of our positive tests or who is being most affected, being and when there's the racial breakdown, it's unknown. We're just not gathering that data. We're not even making an attempt. And I think that is like step number one, is that we need to acknowledge and realize that this is happening. And I think this report lays that out the best we can with the data that we have that's available, and then we can be able to make these informed decisions. Okay, where do these investments need to be made, and what's the best form those can take, and how can we directly address this?
Sean, yes, the data opens the door, and I'm going to call in. Pastor Watts just sent me a message. He's ready now, and so I'm going to dial him in because, he is a data guru. So let's just dial him in and give him a chance to bring his knowledge in from the past 10 years. Also, I know this has been something he's studied.
Hello.
Hey, Pastor Watts, you're live with Crystal and John and Sean.
I was trying to get you to bring me on my hard phone, which is I'm still on.
Okay, I can dial another number if you want to message it to me or something.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. This is brother.
Okay, I'm not sure. Well, let me get his hard line number. Let's see here. All right, just a second. We're going to call him in. Thank you for your patience, everybody, because we are doing the best we can, right? Here we go.
Yeah, we're moving right along. Okay.
Okay, I'm good.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Greetings, Reverend Watts. John Kimmon Shabazz, the elder. Good to hear from you this evening.
Good to be with you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I guess I got to be direct, and I'm presuming that you've read that 2020 report because I took time out, and I want to thank Crystal again for sending it to me to review your position on education and health. And my summarization is that you basically said that the same things that are a detriment to education are a detriment to health as well. So they kind of poverty is one of the direct things that you indicated, housing,
yes,
and various other factors such as transportation and actually I had them all written down here. But I appreciate you for doing that. But I want you to elaborate on and specifically tell us what areas we've made progress in since the 2010 report. As I believe that you were familiar with were involved with the 2010 report as well as the 2020 report. What areas we've made progress in from your perspective as one of the leading black intellectuals here in the state. And I'm just going to give you the floor and listen to what you have to say on that, Reverend Watts.
Okay, well, I appreciate those real calm, real nice comments and compliments you played to me. And let me say this. First of all, I commend you and Crystal, Brother Sylvester, what you guys are doing. This is a much-needed conversation. I really admire you for taking the leadership to do it and step out. We need to start this conversation. Second, I'd like to commend Brother Sean O'Leary and the good people at the Center on Budget and Policy for the work that they've done over the years, not only with the 2010 report and this report and other reports, as well as they put out on a whole host of issues, particularly around the state of working families in West Virginia. But if I could just back up for a second and put this in some of the historical perspective and overview, is that my organization, Hope Community Development Corporation.
Hello?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you now.
We've been following this much longer than the 2010 report. And let me explain to you the backdrop for this. Is that
Please do.
I give a presentation in February of 2002 at the Universal Unitarian Church right across the street from me, Crisis on the African Community, Does Anyone Care? And that presentation, the notes from that was then used by then Delegate Kerry Webster from the 37th Legislative District, 31st Legislative District, now 37th, to into the House Concurrent Resolution 76, which was passed in the legislature, and the result of a hearing on July the 15th, 2002, where they brought in state agencies, They brought in higher education institutions, state police, about everybody you can name, and community-based groups to then put forward, what was the status of African Americans in their respective agencies, the type of programs they ran. This is a historical document. From that date on July 15, 2002, there then was entered in the Select Committee on Minority Affairs was established by the legislature during the 2003 legislative session. And then they had this group to meet. They held public hearings. So to make a long story short, they created the Select Committee on Minority Affairs B report, which was a report over 200 pages documenting just about everything you can imagine about African Americans. They then compiled the report into 4 major categories of education, health, juvenile and adult criminal justice, workforce, and economic development. And there was 23 findings of facts of challenges facing African Americans that were documented, and 36 specific recommendations. And that report was issued in 2003. So that's been the document that we have been working from, right? And that document lays out in detail. That's the legislative document. And so we've been working from that document. So since that time, we've been collecting data annually as the census data put out their averages, right, and looking at these matters. So to make a long story short, that there's been no significant progress made since 2002, right? Not 2010, but this stuff was first documented and brought to the attention of the West Virginia legislature in 2002 and 2003 in the Select Committee report. And no major or significant progress has been made in any of the major areas, whether it's closing the academic achievement gap in public schools, whether it's the disproportionate minority contact with the juvenile justice system, the representation of blacks in the criminal justice system, whether it's the disparity in home ownership, and I would suggest and strongly believe that the health disparities have gotten much worse since 2002 until the present. And so that's my take on it. Now, again, I really admire what they've done with civil budget and policy. My organization, Hope CDC, in partnership with the Tuesday Morning Group and the Charleston NAACP, we were planning on doing a summit, right? And then we saw all these other things were going on. We just decided to postpone it, and we're going to probably do it in January and February through a series, a virtual summit, through a series of virtual things. We did a summit in 2017 on Marshall University's campus, the state of African Americans in West Virginia. We did something in 2018 that was sponsored and co-sponsored by Hope and Marshall University on looking at poverty solutions. And so what we're doing, we're going to codify our work and put it out there in a more detailed fashion so that people can see. And the last thing I will say is this, is that what we're trying to do here with my organization is we're postulating solutions, right? We appreciate everybody collecting the data. We think that's good. We certainly appreciate what the Great Eagle Valley Foundation has done with the Race Matters conversations and discussions. But our position is this, is that in 2003, in the Select Committee on Minority Affairs, there were 23 findings of facts. There were 36 specific recommendations that was put forth by the legislative committee, a few, if any, of which have ever been introduced, right? And so I'll kind of stop there because so people can understand. We believe now, and it's now time to postulate specific solutions, and we are prepared, and we could talk about some of them tonight, specific solutions for each of the areas of inequality that the civil budget and policy have captured in their. We have specific policy solutions and programmatic solutions that could be implemented as early as tomorrow and next week. There's legislation that's actually been passed of things that could be done. So I'll just kind of stop there because that's kind of where we are now. We want to deal with solutions.
Yes, Pastor Watts, I just want to say we're talking about since 2003, and that's is correct. The lifetime of my youngest child that is graduating high school. That was when he was born. That's graduating high school. So we're talking an entire lifetime of a child in West Virginia that has, these issues have been, brought to the attention of leadership, and nothing has been done. And I know that one of the startling statistics from the first report was the child poverty, that Black children in West Virginia, are in a greater poverty than the quote unquote poor white Appalachians. So, I mean, yes, what solutions? What can we do today to improve the lives of so many people?
Well, no, if you look at the issue of poverty, for example, West Virginia received $1.25 billion in money under the CARES Act. We put forth a very reasonable recommendation that we could not get much support from, and that recommendation was simply this: that 20% of the CARES Act funds, which were in $250 million of the $1.25 billion, 20% of those funds be set aside to address poverty and other social determinants of health. In the 220 census tracts, there are 220 census tracts in West Virginia that have poverty rates that are 20% or higher. And, of course, several of those census tracts where there are heavy African-American populations. And so we felt like that was a reasonable approach, 20% of the $1.25 billion. The Justice Administration just kind of shrugged it off. Neither Democrats nor the Republicans would take it seriously and get behind supporting that as a recommendation. But it should have been done. Now, after the NAACP Charleston Branch and Tuesday Morning Group tried to champion it for some time, we were able to get, some of the groups, the Civil Budget and Policy was one of them, I think, that signed on to it. But that was something specifically that could have been done. Secondly, you talk about specific things. In 2017, there was a bill passed, House Bill 2724, relating to the Hurricanes Office of Minority Affairs. It amended the Hurricanes Office of Minority Affairs to include a pilot project to address poverty and other social determinants of health through a conference of community development models to create a template for the whole state of West Virginia. I wrote the draft of that bill. It was introduced by the House Speaker at the time, Tim Armstead, on behalf of, that was the governor's bill. That was the governor's bill that was introduced. But the governor's office have taken no real steps to implement that bill. And what we were suggesting is that some of the CARES Act money could have been used to actually fund it. I believe there's going to be a pretty significant article that should be released tomorrow, I've been told, by Mountain State Spotlight, I believe, the group that Greg Moore and some others are working on. And I think there's going to be a major article they're going to release online tomorrow about the governor's failure to implement and execute his own bill to address poverty, and the fact that the Legislative Oversight Group, in this case the Select Minority Affairs Interim Group, has done nothing to provide oversight for that. So that's a specific example. When I talk about specific things, there are legislation, a piece of legislation that we have worked on that have passed and that are codified in law, but the executive branch chooses not to execute them, and then the legislature will not allocate funding to fund the bills.
So where do we go if we don't have support from the governor's office and now a legislative body? I mean, what do we need to communicate to the community and to the people on the seriousness of this?
I think one of the things, let's talk specifically about the poverty issue, because I'd like to touch on a couple of these issues. But the poverty issue one is the issue because all of these issues, they're driven by poverty. And we can talk, and I can unpack that for you. But I think what we could do is when this article comes out tomorrow, I'm going to immediately send it to you. And because it's not me talking, because it's written by white people, and people have a tendency to pay attention to what white people say, I'm just being honest. And they won't listen to what I've been saying for over 20 years, been writing about these things. A lot of things documented on my Facebook page. But this article that's going to be released tomorrow by Amelia Nicely with Mountain State Spotlight, if it can come to rallying cry so they can see that someone independently has went and talked to all these people and see what her article says about the governor's bill and its failure to be executed, etc. Secondly, and when we do our summit in January, we're going to point out what we need to do is to go back to the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report. That's a legislative document. That's the way black people, whenever we get anything done, it's when we have some piece of legislation, something codified in law that gives us some standing to possibly even go to the court if necessary to try to get some action done or to dramatize the neglect, the not benign neglect. I think getting people to take a look at the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report that existed since 2003, where they can see what we're talking about, and then I will give them the documentation because I wrote all this up. Hey, I wrote it up even possibly in the Senate report. But let me say this: this Select Committee report, because what it does, the Select Committee report on Minority Affairs, it's the basis for the establishment of the Hurricane Office of Minority Affairs. Delegate Cliff Moore and former House Speaker Rick Thompson, they used the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report to justify creating the Hurricane Office of Minority Affairs because of the 23 findings of facts and 36 weeks of recommendations. And they said an office was needed to address those issues. Are you following? Now, most people don't realize that. That's why that office exists. It's supposed to be trying to implement recommendations from that report. Thirdly, when you look at the amended Hurricane Office of Minority Affairs, House Bill 2724 from 2017, Chapter 5, Article 26, 1, 2, and 3 in the Code, you'll see that we wrote language in that bill at that time to modify the Hurricane Office of Minority Affairs to require it to use the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report to guide its office and to require it to report to the Select Committee on Minority Affairs Interim Committee. I think that's where we need to go. When people see what is already codified in law and what has been ignored by both the legislature and by the executive branch of government, it doesn't matter which party is in office, that when laws are passed and codified, they have an obligation to execute the laws. They're going to be amazed.
Excuse me, Reverend Watts, I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
Hold that thought, please. Now, with the Herbert Henderson Office of Minority Affairs, that gets its funding, from what I understand, out of the governor's office, okay, from what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong, okay, and there's a problem with that I didn't foresee because I campaigned for that, thinking that would be something that would be a vehicle where we could address the racial and economic disparities indicated in that 2010 report. I've since kind of pulled back on that because that's up under some political stuff, for lack of a better way of saying it, who's ever in office politically, okay, and it's not able, it really has no teeth. It appears as if empty. So we got to come up with something more direct, which, for instance, I say that we enforce it on the city level, the county level, and the state level, where a percentage based upon a percentage of the annual income would come for growth and development among the specific African-American communities that this report identified. It was 15. I'd like for you to speak to that if you could. 15 African-American communities that were identified in the state of West Virginia specifically.
Yeah, I think what you referenced, again, you raise a good point, right? So the Herbert Henderson Office of Minority Affairs was created through legislation that was passed back in 2012, I believe. A piece of legislation. It created. It's a state. It's in the governor's office, right? It's funded by the West Virginia legislature when they appropriate funding to run the government. It's funded by that. But it has a legislative charge. Is what I'm trying to say. And there's been no real attempt to hold not the office, the governor. The governor is the one that's to be held accountable, right, for that office to execute its responsibility, right? And the legislature is held accountable to say, why aren't you guys providing the legislative oversight to make sure this office does what you, as the legislature, has directed it to do? So I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but I'm saying that the state government is supposed to work for us too, particularly when there's a piece of legislation passed and codified in law, but neither the legislature is providing oversight, nor is the governor's office trying to execute. So they're basically doing what they want to do and ignoring.
Yes, sir.
They're ignoring the statute, and we have not been. I can tell you this: since 2002, I've been trying to get people to pay attention to the Select Committee report. Since the Hurricane Office of Minority Affairs was established, I've been trying to get people to realize that this is a statewide office that's created to address issues around the state for African Americans, but we've got to bring pressure on the governor and the legislature to make sure that to try to get them to live up to the intent of the office. So that's the one thing. In terms of the 15 cities, is that black people, they're not dispersed all over the state, right? Black people live in concentration in 15 counties. Over 90% of all black people live in 15 counties. And in those 15 counties, they live in high concentration in the larger cities in those counties. You follow me?
Yes, I do.
So, for example, when you look at Kanawha County, all right, well, 20% of all black people in the state of West Virginia live in Kanawha County. Okay, so I mean that's pretty significant, right? So when you look at you look at Charleston, you look at Huntington, you look at Beckley, you look at Bluefield, you look at Wheeling, you look at Martinsburg, you look at Charlestown. You know, you're starting to get a large. You look at Welch. You're getting a significant part of the African American population just in those places. And that's what I've been trying to suggest. We can put together a report and we can talk about the state of African Americans, which I think is a good thing to do. But to address issues affecting African Americans, they have to be what I call, it has to be place-based, it has to be people-focused. So you got to target your efforts in a specific place for the people that live in that place. Otherwise, you'll never help black people, and that's the problem. We keep thinking we're going to help black people by passing a law at the state level. It never happens, right? But we need to pass laws at the state level to create a framework, and then each community then has to say, what are the issues and what are the challenges that we have, and what's the structure we want to create to try to address that. Now, I'll say this, and I'll let you guys kind of give me some feedback. That's what we've tried to do. And most people totally misunderstand what I've been trying to do over the years, right? What I've tried to do over the years is say, look, I have served the west side of Charleston for the better part of 30 years. I know this community like no other place. And I think I know this community better than probably anybody know their community because I've literally studied the census data by tract, by block, what's going on in the schools, the crime, everything you can imagine. My staff is constantly getting this information for us to analyze and what does it mean for us. So we've actually developed what we call the West Side Revive. It's a comprehensive plan to address poverty and other social terms of health through a comprehensive community development model. It was the basis for the governor's bill, right? I wrote the draft for the governor's bill and then took it to the governor's people at the time, Nick Casey, and it was written based on what we're trying to do here on the west side of Charleston. The west side was supposed to be the model community, and then what we were going to do is to say, look, we're going to help any community in the state of West Virginia where there's a handful of black people to say, guys, here's what we have developed. Here's what we think is transferable to your respective community. Now, we're still willing to do that. I'm willing to share the work that we've done, and we don't brag a lot about what we've done, but you come over here. We've done some pretty significant things with all the challenges that we have, right? And we have a legislative framework and a programmatic framework in terms of how these issues are supposed to be addressed.
Yeah. Yeah. And Reverend Watts.
Let's see we've got someone that might want to
Go.
speak and see what.
Okay.
Hello, you're
Okay.
live. Hello, caller.
Hello?
Okay, maybe. Hello.
Hello?
Hi. Yes. Is it,
Hello?
Can you hear us? Can
Hello?
you hear us? I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Uh-huh. Who are we speaking with?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Benny. Benjamin Green.
Hey, Benjamin. Did you
Okay,
have a
Benjamin Green.
Hello, how you guys doing today?
We're doing good.
I was just sitting and listening to your. Yes, I did. I was just sitting listening to you guys' conversation, and first of all, I wanted to say I want to thank Pastor Watts for what he's done from the community. Actually, I am a lifelong resident of the west side of Charleston. I moved to other places. Actually, right now I'm out on the road. I got my CDL license a couple weeks ago, my permit, so I'm out on the road now. But this is one issue that I have with the community. It's a lot of plans and stuff going around to help and benefit the community. But I think one of the things that Pastor Watts said is that we have to target our efforts. And I believe wholeheartedly in that right there is what we have to target. So one of the reasons that I left West Virginia, and just to go a little bit into my background, I went to federal prison for a long time, over a decade, came home and went to college, graduated from West Virginia State University this year, class of 2020 in May. And since the COVID, I thank you. I appreciate that. Sir. And it just seems like, since not even since COVID hit, but, for the whole time I was in West Virginia, there wasn't the opportunity for progressive black men. It's like they try to give you an opportunity that they want to have, but it's not like they're nurturing the talent. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, because I sat there for 4 or 5 years, and the whole community know me. My community know me, appreciate what I'm doing, man. Cousin, then done what he done and came home. He trying to better himself. He graduating. He doing right. Ain't putting no more poison in the community. Nothing like that. And it is as if our leaders don't nourish the talent or don't put that seed into what the little youngsters need to really grow. You know what I'm saying? And it is as if we have, it's like the youth and everything is out there being misled. I've had town halls, this, that, and the third. I'm willing to work with anyone. And, most of the people willing to work with you most of the time, but we have to actually come together and have a targeted plan. And so one of my things is, what are we going to do to start nourishing people and developing people into their specific roles?
You really, man, what you said was it's profound. I can amen what you're saying. I think that those of us who are supposed to be leaders, I think that we failed in terms of we have not maybe worked hard enough to try to nurture the next generation and that type of thing. But what I can tell you, what I will say to you, and I'm on a crusade. This is my last crusade. I'll be 65 years old in another month. I'm not a spring chicken. My best years are behind me, and my health certainly is not what it used to be. But I'm actually trying to recruit young people, and I extend that same invitation to you. I met with some young people several months ago, and I said, look, guys, I will spend time with you guys once a week. We can agree on the time. I'll make myself available to do it, and we'll schedule it, and we'll make it happen. They said, okay, Rev. Not a single one of them has come back to me. One of the real things that just breaks my heart, as hard as I've worked, and I'm not saying this boastfully, but I know a lot of stuff, and it's not by accident. It's on purpose. I've tried to learn things so I can help my community. But I can't find any young people that are willing to spend time to have a conversation. I'm not asking them to follow me. I'm saying let's have a conversation. Let me tell you what I have learned, where the pitfalls are, where the challenges are, where the resistance is, and you would have the benefit, of my experience. And everything I say, it's either written down or now it's on Facebook or it's on the video because I've been documenting all of my work over the years. So I would welcome the opportunity to get a group of young people to say, guys, here's where we've been, here's where we are, and here's the opportunity that I think we have. And the west side of Charleston right now may be the only place in the whole state where blacks, there is a handful of us over here, and maybe we can get us some of the specific things that we're working on and things that we're doing. But this could be a laboratory, to really serve as a catalyst for movement around the state. But we've been unable to get people to really sit down and talk to us and spend time with us. For 23 years, I've been going to the West Virginia legislature. Most of the time, I'm up there by myself. In the last few years, Crystal, you've been there, right?
Yeah.
And you and I are sometimes the only people of color that's up there.
Yeah, I want to speak to that real quick, Pastor Watts, because before this show, I put it in the show notes. I put a link to a video that you made 10 years ago, and you're talking about exactly what Benny is talking about, and that is how the community has to come together. And I think that we are at a point now in 2020 with your the 2020 report that was overlooked, and I think sometimes it is the messenger that where things where things get lost. People don't want to listen to it. Oh, they think that's Pastor Watt's thing. Oh, they think that's Crystal's thing. Oh, they think that's this. But yet, when Center for Budget and Policy comes out with a report, we got white people talking to white people, right? Which gets some momentum going. But how does that trickle down into the community? And I think where we've seen nationally is the overwhelming movement of black people to grassroots organize. And I don't know where that is in West Virginia. I don't know where that link is. And one of the things is really breaking down these issues. Like you said, there's an open invitation, and I have been so blessed to sit and listen to you talk about these complex issues in ways that I can understand how policy works, how things move. And I think sometimes our community is at, they check out of issues because it's not presented to them. It's presented them in the legalese, so to speak. So what I'm hoping to do, and I really, really hope that Black by God, this platform and others, this legislative session, can start to interpret some of those issues in the language of the people, as John always says. And, because the 2020 plan, helping people to understand that, these things are already in code. They are the law. We need to hold people accountable, and we need to show up, not just when we're voting, right, but in policy. And, I don't have all the answers, but I do know that what's missing is you said this years ago, Pastor Watts, you said it, and it stuck with me, that if we just go to the Capitol, if we just show up, right, we will see change. And I truly believe that, because I know that when I'm at the Capitol for 90 days in a supermajority Republican legislature, I don't see black people. And so if you have a group of white people, most predominantly white men, together for 90 days, and they don't see black people, they're not thinking of black people. We don't even exist. And I'll just leave it there.
Okay.
Let me say this. I'll just say one thing quickly, is that, and I agree with everything that you're saying, right? And I appreciate the efforts of the progressive white groups and those different groups. But they at the end of the day, they cannot really speak for us. And that is part of the problem right now. Part of the problem is that progressive groups, they want to speak for black people. Part of the problem is some of the elite well-educated, well-connected blacks. They want to be with the progressive groups to speaking for blacks. And it hasn't worked, and it's not going to work. It's not going to work now. As much as I appreciate what the Center on Intelligent Policy has done, but that's a report. It only has census data in it. It doesn't have the type of specific solutions that needs to be a part of a document if we're going to move something forward. Now, we chose to say, okay, they're going to do this. We will support it. And once they get their document out, then we will come behind that and say, okay, here's the specific solution. I could go to each one of the things they've talked about. And it's important that people kind of understand that some of us have actually thought through specific solutions for these issues. And in some cases, there's already a law that is in place to address the problem. But for some reason, some people don't want to talk about what's already in place. And they don't want to come around and support moving that forward. We cannot keep on just diagnosing the problem. That's half solved, as the great Charles F. Kettering would say. A problem well defined is a problem half solved. But we got to postulate specific solutions. And before we get off tonight, I want to talk about two specific things that we need to be focusing on, because they're probably the only things that we have any real legitimate chance of getting anything done during the upcoming legislative session. And that's what people fail to realize, is that when it comes to the legislature, you have to read and interpret the groups is in power. What is it that they have an appetite for, right? And what do you think you can get them to buy in and to support? And I think there's a couple of things that there may be an opportunity here of this coming legislative session. But if we can keep this conversation going, if you guys can help me to get people starting to read some of these documents I'm talking about, they're not that long and they're not that complicated. What's happened is we just assume that nobody has figured anything out. And so I learned many years ago how to not get anything done. As a matter of fact, I consider myself an expert on how to not get anything done. You know the way to get nothing done?
How's that?
Keep starting over.
Oh.
Let another person come to you and say, well, let's start over. And that's what these white groups mean. They don't always mean to do it, but they do. And some people join in with them with a start over. Why is it no one is talking about the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report? Why are they not talking about the 2004 Senate Bill 573 Minority Economic Development Bill, which is codified in law? Why are they talking about House Bill 2950 that was passed in 2009, I believe, the Neighborhood House Economic Stabilization Bill? Why are they talking about the Minority Health Bill that was passed in 2012 that created the Office of Minority Health? These things are already codified in law. They're already there. Yet when we try to bring those things up, people want to talk about something else that's going to get nothing done because you're going to start over. And if you start over, you get absolutely nothing done. And that's what we keep doing as blacks. We keep letting people start us over rather than looking at the people that's been working on this stuff for 20-some years to say, okay, what do you guys think the opportunity are? I think we can point you in the right direction. If we can get people to rally around one or two things, which I hope we can talk before we go off the air, then I think that's a strategy to try to move something forward.
Okay. Now, Reverend Watts, I wanted to get this in. Well, real quickly. Now, Reverend Watts, you mentioned benign neglect to summarize since that 2003 Minority Select Committee report. That they had been placed on notice with, when I say they, the establishment had been placed on notice with information that they were these disparities existed. Okay.
That's correct.
So theoretically, at that time, they were charged with correcting these disparities and keeping a data on them since 2003. Okay. Now, really, representing the grassroots, I would say that we're looking at tangibles, okay? Tangibles in terms of the grassroots would be impacting home ownership, which I think impacting home ownership among so-called low-income people would impact the wealth disparity, okay, in terms of theoretically, meaning that it's something tangible. You help someone, you build a home for someone, okay? And I would like to be able to get you to respond to home ownership and black farmers in West Virginia, okay, to those 2 points. Are there any black farmers in West Virginia to your knowledge?
Not that I personally know. Not that I know. No,
Okay.
I was touch bases with some people tomorrow to see that they may know some, but no, I do not know any black farmers in West Virginia.
Okay. Now,
Well,
I just
lobbied, John, we could talk about this. I lobbied for agriculture and ag issues for about 3 years, and so there's a huge opportunity in that, especially, we lost a good candidate with Senator Bob Beach to be our agriculture commissioner, but there's the opportunity for black farmers in West Virginia is there. The opportunity in the cannabis industry is there. But I think that what is important, that we discussed tonight is it really just struck with me, Pastor Watts, is the work that's already been done, what's already in code, and how, can you explain to us how that benefits, home ownership and the poverty? I mean, what is it that we need to hold leaders accountable to?
I want to talk specifically, to John's question, then I can talk generally talk about home ownership. Okay. First of all, we've got to get some people to have a little bit more intellectual curiosity. They got to understand what's there. I can be a resource. I can point them in the right direction, right? So you start talking about home ownership. Let's say for someone that lives in a city like Charleston, any of the major cities, black cities in West Virginia, their local city government probably have money from the federal government. It's called home blend money. It's to help low-income people purchase houses. They can get up to, depending on what the city chooses to do, it can be 20%. It can be, some cities I think at one time had as much as 40%, that they can use these federal monies to help buy down the mortgage loan. So right now in Charleston, a person actually can buy a house anywhere in Kanawha County. If they meet the income guidelines and the criteria and get their credit where it's supposed to be, then if they buy a house for $100,000, they give them 20 to get it down to 80. Buy a house for 50, they can get to 20, get them down to 40. So that is a program that's already revolving in almost every city in West Virginia. If they get what's called the federal dollars to come to the Community Development Block Grant Program. So that's the best shot at home ownership for a low-income person because it's designed for low to moderate income families. Then the Western Housing Development Fund, which is the largest housing development mortgage funding entity in the state of West Virginia. They have programs very often, always for first-time home buyers, and they have programs also for low to moderate income home buyers to where they can get mortgages at lower rates. These are the programs that actually exist already. Now, I'm going to tell you another program that I bet you there are 5 black people in West Virginia know about it, and that is anyone that lives in HUD subsidized housing have a Section 8 HUD voucher, okay? They got a HUD voucher helping to pay their rent, right? That HUD voucher can be used to pay their mortgage payment for 15 years, and most people don't even know that. Anybody who lives in federally subsidized housing, they have a program that's called the self-sufficiency program, and they can let them. I want to be in a self-sufficiency program. I'm sorry. Yes. Yes.
I'm
yes,
listening.
Okay.
I'm listening.
Now,
I
didn't mean to interrupt you, sir. But I just want to let you know I've been one of these people who have applied for all of these programs and stuff like that. My issue is I'm a convicted felon, a federal felon.
That's right.
And I mean, it's so. All of these programs, I've been up there to the home. I've been up there to the home blend. I've applied for that. I've applied for that other one through the city. I already disqualified for the HUD and everything. But like for people like me who have felonies, we have obstacles and stuff that don't allow us to qualify for these programs. Which, yes, sir.
No, you're right. I mean, I've written voluminously about that. A convicted felon is not a full citizen because you can be legally discriminated against. The 14th Amendment don't apply to you. You don't have equal protection under the laws. But let me tell you what may be encouraging for you possibly, right? And then we talk about organizing. You're exactly right. But let me say this. There's one thing that they won't tell people. Now, when it comes to people living in public housing, they will say a felon can't live in public. That's not true. If the federal government changed the law, they won't tell you that. You can request to be reconsidered, right, after 3 or 4 years or whatever, and you can request a hearing. I went with people, right, to get those requests. Bill Clinton gave us this now. Bill Clinton and Joe Biden, when they gave us the crime bill is what basically said that if a person has a federal felony from the federal government, you can deny them federal benefits, right? Now, the guy who passed that law, the guy who passed it, the architect of the crime bill was one Joseph Biden. Now, he has said that he was wrong. He's also said that when he gets in office, he's going to do something to address it. So we will see. He will have the opportunity to try to submit legislation to get Congress to relax some of those consequences against felons that was a part of he and Clinton's crime bill. But you're right.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just speaking to that point because it is as if like I've been beating this same drum, and I'm somebody who out here been almost homeless and been out here didn't put no more poison in the community or nothing. I caught a 12-year federal prison off of Florida Street right there. I went back to school and done everything that I could to be the best person that I could. But all of these programs, people like me are disqualified for them. So it's like it don't matter what you do, they want to push you back towards the streets. But my thing is, at what point is the leadership within the community going to step up and say, "Hold up, this one of our lights right here. You know, y'all need to. We got to start doing right by people like him to make sure that they make it out because he's working. Because like a lot of these people that's on these programs, I mean, they comfortable and don't, you know, they just sitting down, don't want to do nothing. A lot of people, I busted my butt out there, Pastor, and just to be applying and reaching out and just to be disqualified for a mistake that I made, it was a reason that I had to come back there and make a protest vote. But another reason why people like me have to leave out of the state is just because the opportunity just doesn't present itself.
Yeah, it's not just,
you know, especially if you're trying to progress and move forward in life.
It's just not people. It's a lot of people. Charleston, West Virginia, has the third fastest brain drain of cities in the United States of America. I mean, so a lot of people want more are having to leave the state. You're true. It's a reality. All I can say is that you're right. I've studied the federal mandatory minimums. I've written about it. I've talked to Capitol about it. I've talked to Manchin about it. We're trying to get them to enter legislation to pass. You know, they got some legislation passed last year. President-elect Biden, he has an opportunity, he and Kamala Harris, to try to make a statement to relax some of these consequences that's on individuals with federal felonies. But all I can say to you is this right here. If you want to buy a house, I'll work with you. You need to rent a house, I'll rent you one. Right? That's the reason we got into housing. It's not because I necessarily wanted to do it. It's because I saw how unfair it was. And I saw how the people outside this community was controlling much of the property inside the community. And that's right what's happening right now. That absentee people own much of the West Side, and they're going to be owning much more of it because of some things the city has done to allow this one set of brothers to come in and buy up all this land and build all this subsidized housing, which I'm not against, but I don't think it all should be on the West Side. I don't think it all should be around Mary C. Snow. We should become.
No,
but that's
you're exactly right. Yeah, I spoke already with. Yes, sir.
No, I mean you're right. We tried to fight that. I don't know where you were. If you go on my Facebook page, you'll see we had community meetings. We tried to fight it. We tried to get the city not to pass the redistricting overlay. The redistricting overlay basically turns the West Side Flats into an area like nowhere else in Charleston. You can build stuff there that you can't build nowhere else. And I think that now once people see how they are putting this stuff in there on top of each other, now they might have an outcry to demand that a moratorium be placed on it, and they not allow them to keep stacking those places in like that. They're building, like right down the street from where I live on 3rd Avenue, they're putting 5 two-bedroom apartments in a space where there should have been only 2 houses. So they're going to put 10 families in a space where there should have been only 2 houses. No playground, and on 4th Avenue they're doing the same thing. And that's a whole separate conversation. That's what I'm saying, to get back to what you said, Brother Shabbat. It has to be place-based. People live in a community. Okay. They live in a neighborhood. Most blacks live under some city government. They live under some code or some statute, and that's where the fight really has to be had. And whoever controls the land, they control the people that own that land. And we don't own enough property. We don't control enough property in our communities, and so we have a very little that we can do. But to specifically answer your question, there are home ownership opportunities that people should be pursuing. They need to know about them. They need to know how to apply for them, and they need to go ahead and get into the queue to start working on their credit, because that's going to be the barrier. That's going to be the barrier. Mm-hmm. But it's not a barrier that cannot be overcome, because they can work with you on that. They can get you to counseling, they can help you get consolidation, those type of things. But as the scripture says, my people perish for the lack of knowledge, there are some opportunities that our people don't know about. They're intimidated by the process. So unlike my brother on the line here, they don't try to work through the process, and we got to create advocacy entities at the community level to help advocate for people in all these systems.
You know, Reverend Watts, I gotta say I agree with that, and I want to tell my brother Benny that I can be of help to you in part, because I was deprived of access to certain resources because I also was a past convicted felon. But it had been like 20, 30 years ago, and that was the only thing that I had there. And as Reverend Watts indicated, I did have to apply more than once. Okay, the initial time I was barred housing for like about 5 years based upon a 25-year-old felony that occurred when I was like 18. However, I was barred for specific. See, a lot of times, and this is you can petition, because sometimes if you're not available to the knowledge, they try to bar you perpetually without giving you a hearing or anything. As Pastor Watts indicated, you are entitled to a hearing, especially if they're talking about barring you perpetually. But if they can get you to go for it without even asking for what is called due process, to give an explanation why you barred perpetually forever. You know, this is something. The issue of expungement. Since we're talking about this, I talked to Reverend Watts. I think it must have been like 10 years ago. I suggested to him, and after doing some research, yourself and David Freisen. You gave me a contact with Kessler up here in Marshall County, where I contacted him and let him know that the statute on expungement here in the state of West Virginia was unconstitutional and needed to be reconstructed. Okay, his office said they were aware of it, as West Virginia, as Virginia, nearby Virginia, had updated and upgraded its expungement statute to include people who were previously excluded from the expunge for the benefits of it. I believe it would be unlawful to exclude someone from expungement perpetually. And there's one other clause in the West Virginia Expungement Act that I need to talk about real quickly.
But you got that doesn't apply to people with a felony expungement. A felony.
It doesn't apply to federal felons, though.
Yeah. We have now. on the state level, I think they would look at a federal felony as well, and use that against you.
No.
They use all of that.
No, listen. Under the expungement laws, expungement laws that they have within the state, stuff like that, that applies to people who have state convictions. People who have federal convicted of felonies in the federal that don't apply to them. They don't allow. They tell us we have to get a what they call a pardon. So under the 1994 crime bill, the 1994 crime bill states that once you're a felon, you are excluded from the housing. Well, just specifically housing for life. And it's other stuff that you're excluded from. Like now, I can get a medical card and stuff like that. But housing, I'm not worried about the housing. I'm blessed and fortunate enough for my family to own property and, to get a job, to work through my family and stuff like that. Everybody's not that fortunate. I'm in a position where I'm able to work through my situation. So the thing is, there's a lot of brothers who are not able to really work through the situation like that need a little help. You know what I'm saying? And my thing is, we have to start, acknowledging what their issues are and advocating for them as well. Because, they got dudes that in the state that can be dudes with any type of crime. But you could have a federal drug possession crime, and they're excluding you for life.
That's just the law, man. That's the law. And Joe Biden can do something about it. He and Kamala Harris, they can get a bill passed to do something about it. That is the law. And it's been the law since 1994. It's exactly been the law since 1994. And that's when I'll be out here pleading with these brothers, man. People understand for years I've pleaded with these young brothers. And you got to understand, they got a system basically whereby they will decide who they're going to bring into the federal system. And that is a decision that is made. A lot of people don't understand. Any drug charge can be brought into the federal system. Any drug, because all drugs fall under the federal government. So they can pick up somebody on a marijuana charge if they want to and bring them into the federal system, which they did for many, many years. Right? That's the power of the federal government. But what they have done
they just kind of started relaxing on a little bit of the law.
That's what I'm trying to say. And they're relaxed on letting people with federal felonies get in public housing. They're relaxed on people with federal felonies to get workforce development, job training, for all that stuff. You were excluded from all that before. But before we get off, I want to get to an issue that I think is the two most important issues. I feel like that they rank up as the two top issues affecting blacks, and nothing's going to change for us until we address these issues. And we can talk all we want to talk, but let me tell you what, until we address this education thing, and I've been studying this for 25 years, and I believe I have figured something out that really I didn't understand the full ramifications of the impact it had on black people, and that is the over and excessive discipline and the disproportionate suspensions and expulsions on blacks. I went back to 1976 and found documentation where they knew in 1976 that blacks were being suspended twice the rates of whites in West Virginia. Another report was done in 1980. They only looked at Kanawha County, but in Kanawha County they knew that. But nothing has been done about it. Black students are suspended at twice the rate of whites. They are referred for discipline at twice the rate of whites. Now, people don't understand how significant that is and what that really does. Let me give you 45 seconds to answer how serious it is. It's that this suspension thing is contributing to truancy, because every day you're suspended, it's unexcused. When you get 10 days of unexcused absences, the school can file a petition against the child and the parent, and they can bring the child into the juvenile justice system. In the state of West Virginia, the number one offense to bring kids into the juvenile justice system is the status offense of truancy from school. Secondly, all these days of unexcused absence, these kids are missing instruction. The school is not obligated to make sure you get all your work. You got so many days to get all the work from the school. Your parents got to pick it up, and you have so many days to get it turned in. these kids are missing so much instruction. So it's contributing to the achievement gap. It's contributing to truancy. It's contributing to kids going to the juvenile justice system. It's contributing to some of these kids dropping out of school because they get so far behind, they get frustrated, right? And there's a recent study I just read a couple of months ago. Now, these professors realized they did this longitudinal study, and what they've concluded that suspension may be the most significant thing that happens in the life of a child that moves them from the schoolyard to the prison yard pipeline. And so this poor education in our community, this has a cumulative effect. It has a cumulative effect because it's not the number of times. If you look at in West Virginia right now, 15% of black kids are suspended every year from school. It's not the same 15% that get suspended. So this thing is affecting thousands of kids over a period of time. And I think when you look at a community like the west side of Charleston, there was an article in the paper last week by Howard Swint. He'd been working as a substitute. And I'm assuming the data that he put forth in the paper was accurate because I have not heard Kanawha County School to rebut what he said. So what he says in the paper is that 70% of the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders at what's called now Westside Middle School are reading on the 3rd grade level. 70%, he says, of 6th, 7th, 8th graders. That means they're 3, 4 to 5 years behind. You go up to Capitol High School, you'll find the same thing. That a lot of those black kids, so our kids are getting what I call attendance certificates. Even those who go to school and graduate, they can't do college level work, a high percentage of them, when they graduate. And that's black and white poor kids, right? So this education thing is a major issue. Now, it is doubly compounded. Our kids have not had school really for several months. March, April, May of last year, August, September, October, and November for the most part this year, they've been totally interrupted. And then you put it in the middle of the summer months. So we have missed basically the equivalent of almost a year of academic instruction. And that's going to be devastating for a lot of these kids. So what I'm saying is that we have got to really start having this real conversation. It's not what is the school system going to do. And we got to continue, but we got to figure out what are we going to do? What are we going to do in terms of turning our churches into learning centers like it was after slavery, where families were there learning how to read, adults, grandparents were learning how to read. We've got to figure out how we increase literacy and numeracy in our neighborhoods and how people know more about computers and how to use a cell phone. We got in our hands a technology that's more sophisticated than the technology to put the men on the moon the first time they went. But we don't know nothing about coding. So what I'm trying to suggest here, and I'm going to be releasing things I've been holding back, I've written some time ago. I call it this silent underlying condition, the silent underlying condition, the over-discipline, disproportionate suspicion and expulsion of blacks is a contributor to our poor educational outcomes in the school, right? And it's been normalized into the system, and everybody's accepting it. It's a national phenomenon, but it's normalized. And so when you go into a community like the West Side, I love these people. I moved here because I love the people over here. But once I got in here and was living every day and dealing with everything, I began to realize, and I got criticized. I wrote an article about it. I said there's a need for a West Side story. This community is stunted. It's stunted intellectually. It's stunted educationally, socially, economically. We are stunted over here. And a stunning community does not produce higher achieving children. And so we have got to decide what we are going to do. What we are going to do ourselves while we're trying to fight this system. Are we going to align all our resources from these fraternities and sororities and clubs and lodges and all these groups that pontificate and do all this stuff that really doesn't have a lot of significant impact over the long haul? Because we no longer have a shared vision of where we're trying to go. Know that we share a shared understanding of the pain and the challenges that face. And what I'm trying to suggest, what if there's just one issue? What if we come together and say, can't we agree that every child needs to be educated? Can't we agree on that?
Yes.
And the data saying it's not happening.
Of
Can't
course.
we just agree that let's bring everything they got to the table and say, well, how can we put what we got together and make something happen? And so the other thing is this whole thing on health. Now, I will encourage you, man, help me on this one. Go back and look at my Facebook page on May the 19th. I gave a major address on the state of health for blacks and low-income whites in West Virginia. Eyewitness experience of my 20 years. Go back and listen to it. And I lay out the fact that this state has totally ignored all the data about the health disparities. And I mean, we can keep writing about it. Everybody knows this stuff and paying attention to it. All these health disparities that were first identified in 1999, when my friend Savoya Spotswood put together the first report on health disparities. And reports were put together up to about 2007, and they stopped producing the reports. So here's the point I'm trying to make. And that's what I was trying to write about in the article. All the research says that there are two things that determines the health of a community: the education level and the income level. Best educated communities, highest incomes, they're the healthiest communities. The lower educated communities, poor communities, they're the most unhealthy communities. Secondly, the research says the number one predictor of the educational outcomes of a community is the level of poverty in that community. So when poverty reaches 20 to 30%, just 20 to 30%, right, the education levels of the children in that community declines. And the children in that community, 50% or more, would do worse economically than what their parents did. That's the west side of Charleston. That's the west side of Charleston right there. And that's other communities that have the type of concentration of poverty that we have over here. And that's why we were trying to say to the mayor's office, you cannot pass this redistricting overlay. You cannot make the west side flats an extension of Orchard Manor, Little Page, and Washington Manor. We have to have some neighborhood where you got a chance to get some young couples, families in, working people, moving toward the middle class. We can't just put all the poor people together in one place. We know what that does. But, you know, I mean, they didn't care. I mean, these people trying to make money. But I've got things posted out of that, and I just want to stay connected with you guys. I'm very passionate about this because for me, it's like watching the Holocaust. You're watching it in slow motion. And you're so frustrated because you can't do nothing about it. And every day you see things in some ways getting worse than what they were the day before. Or at best, there's no really measurable or significant improvement because there's no outcry. There's no outcry. So we are trying to, listen, and I'll get criticized for saying this, but somebody got to say out loud what they really believe, right? And I normally would stay away from that because I don't want to be fighting with black people in public. I never criticize black people publicly, no matter what they say about me, because it's a zero-sum game. But guys, we're doing these symbolic things. We're getting Martin Luther King's name on a sign on the street downtown and celebrating it like that's some great victory. We're getting Stonewall Jackson's name taken down off the school, which I totally supported, right? But seem to be less concerned about the fact that the school inside the building reading on the third grade level. We're talking about defunding the police, which I understand we need to reform police. I get all of that. But we ought to be also at the same time saying we want our kids to be able to go to school. We're paying taxes for them to go, and then you're suspending them, right? And we are the most unhealthy people in West Virginia. Black people, as a group, are more unhealthy than poor white people. Black people, as a group, are more unhealthy than poor whites. So these are not things that we are coalescing around, this education, this health, and this COVID-19, it ought to be the thing that bring us together to realize that we were vulnerable all the time. Now we know we're a vulnerable population, right? And we know that we have all these underlying health conditions, and we know that we're unhealthy. And those are two issues that I believe that we may be able to, if nothing else, to shame the Republicans to do something about in the upcoming legislative session if they don't postpone it. There's conversation about they're going to delay it until in April. But those are some of my thoughts about some of these issues, and we got more time. I'm more than glad to unpack each of the areas in the Center's report on the fact that there's legislation stuff already in place that we could be rallying around to try to get some resources allocated to address some of these issues.
Yes, I think we're not quite out of time yet, but we've probably got about 5 minutes. So I want to give Benny and John, if you're still on there, a chance to respond as we come to it here.
Well, I'm on here, and I'm going to respond real quickly and give my man Benny an opportunity to also respond. First of all, I appreciate what you had to say, Reverend Watts. I listened closely. I called myself listening closely. I'm going to say real quickly that I'm looking to see something direct and tangible, okay? And I'm still, when I say direct and tangible, I'm still on the notion of, you mentioned home ownership, that there were already programs in place, which were to my experience is that those programs are based upon credit, and sometimes you can get hung up in that area, right? So I'm not saying that that's not legitimate, but as someone that's been convicted, you're low income, you might run into that. You might have to be persistent with that. Long story short, I'd like to be able to formulate something myself called the Fair Share Program, and I'd want to be able to get a comment from Reverend Watts in reference to Ice Cube's program. Okay, if he had an opportunity, because we did a show on that, I think last week, and I didn't get a chance to add, and we're running out of time, but I wanted to be able to ask Reverend Watts what he thought about that, what I just got finished speaking about. Okay. Real quickly, could you comment?
Could you just quickly, I'm not totally familiar with the Fair Share Program. Could you just quickly give an overview, and I can tell you what I think it's something that's viable?
Quickly, the overview would be based upon our percentages, we would get a certain percentage in each county throughout the state would come directly to our personal growth and development, collective growth and development, meaning to buy homes and so forth, farms for African American people. Okay. Now this is a project I'm working on. Okay, and I got the idea from Ice Cube's program. But the Fair Share Program would be specifically dealing with West Virginia. I want to take some time and meet with you in reference to that after the show and give you in deeper detail of what I'm talking about, because it's based upon Ice Cube's program.
I understand the concept, what you're saying. Just quickly, what I would say, my response to that is that what you said is not exactly what we were talking about, but it's similar, right? And we were saying, okay, take, as I said earlier, 20% of the CARES Act funds, which would have been $250 million, right, which is no small amount of money, and focus it in these communities for projects. I think that if the Biden administration, they could come up with a program, and a federal program, that they could target monies to come to the states to support something like that. I don't think that this legislature and this governor would even respond to it. That's how hostile they are toward things like that.
Okay.
I just don't think that they would be willing to respond to it. But I think it's an idea that's worthy. Let me say this one last thing about this economics thing. I try to tell people the wealth of this country, it's not in the government. The wealth of this country is in the private sector. That's where the wealth is. That's who got the money. The government got debt, right? $20-some trillion of it. The government owns a lot of buildings, a lot of land, but the government has debt. So what I'd like to have a conversation with you and Crystal about is that we need to take that concept that you just discussed, and we need to take it to the private business sector, those people where we're spending our money with, and ask them, this is private money. Will you donate monies to set up this Fair Share Program? And in those places where there are a large African American presence and they're spending their money in the economy with those businesses, you see what I'm saying? That's where we failed. We never hold private sector accountable. There's no economic reciprocity. They take our money and we don't expect nothing in return. And so I wish I could talk to LeBron and James and those guys, man. They had these people because they were willing to do almost anything that they wanted them to do. When the NFL commissioner, when he offered $200 million or $250 million, what it was right off the bat, right? The NBA, they put up $300 million to do something. Man, if they was offered that, no one asked them to do anything. They could have created $1 trillion fund, and that's what let me tell you where the money could have came from. If they would said to the NBA, we're not going to play, NFL, we're not going to play, Major League Baseball, we are not going to play, and then we're going to go to all of these Nike and Reebok and Puma and all these people and say, get your checkbooks out because we want $1 trillion fund, right? Then you go to the NCAA. The NCAA, which is the most exploitive business maybe in the country, that has a form of sharecropping in terms of having a labor force that they don't have to pay, and they're making billions of dollars. Just like with football, they don't care. They're going to play that NCAA football, and they don't care if a single person's in the stands. And they're going to play the NFL because there's so much money from these TV revenues of these sponsors. That's where the money is, and that's where black people need to be talking to. And that's where I really had a problem with Obama because Obama should have stayed out of it. When he let them, convinced them to go ahead and play the NBA when they were thinking about not playing, it was probably the greatest leverage point that black people ever had in history to get the private sector to do right by black community. The money's in the private sector, and that's where the money needs to come from.
Reverend Watts, when you come on next Sunday, it feels like we're running out of time and we got so much to talk about.
I'll do that, sure, and I won't be late next time. I won't take a nap, which I know we don't do.
Benny will come back next Sunday too, and invite more voices into this conversation because this is a long time coming. I know Brother Shabazz has been wanting to have a statewide opportunity for people to join in the conversation, and that's what we're trying to do. So. They're going to cut us off of our time here, but we can come back next Sunday, and I will try my best to get all of these links out on the Black by God Twitter page and any other resources anybody wants to send to me. So I think with that, we're about running out of time.
Thank you so much, Crystal.
Sure thing. Thank you, guys. Brother Benny.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Yes, sir.
I need to get Benny's contact information.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll give you my email.
Okay.
And we can stay linked up through Crystal.
Okay.
It's a pleasure meeting you, brothers.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes,
I'll be on the road. I'll make sure I call you in next week.
All right. Peace.
Stay safe. You're